In direct contradiction to the notion of Mandela Effect, believers of it fetch old footage or archives of publications, video or photos showing a change, trying to ironically prove their points that particular thing has indeed changed. This is one of the big giveaways that this effect is specious. The followers, through some kind of egocentric mechanism, overlook the fact having discovered supposed other reality evidence questions the legitimacy of this effect. If we humor reality shift, all antecedents and contingencies must respectfully change as well. You can't simply claim that an alternate reality has changed things, but your memory as well as some relic of that thing are somehow immune to the change or reality shift. That's called cherry picking. In such cases, it lends an individual or object supposedly crossed over from my parallel reality a special position in existence, one that supersedes the footing and volition of others. It also disregards perpetual events that necessarily draw from an original event. It emerges as a non sequitur. For example, the common political topics that surrounded Mandela himself were constantly ongoing. How would a Mandela Effect believer reconcile the fact these topics to this day are ongoing due to his actions, presence, and words well after the 1980s? The claim such a bogus fact he died in the 80s, they would have had to be disconnected from the world, since all perpetual contingencies based on him were constantly emerging in media. Maintaining integrity of precedence and contingency is a common problem in time travel movies. In other words, you are necessarily part of the change, and thereby so should your memory on that which your memory is based on, as well as the thing in question. It is impossible to have a memory of something if that said memory is part of a reality that always was and has supposedly shifted, or if one were describing it differently, the object was part of some other always was within a given reality. The alternate reality is claimed to be that which always has been, as well with its own inherent history. This signifies that it should include that which is in its present time. All things and subjects are then interwoven in a contingent manner with inherent history of what always was, therefore invoke no new or alternate memory of what is now. All things being inclusive of memory. If there is a new memory, it is necessarily part of that reality historically and presently. It's one or the other, you can't have both. They will, in fact, self-proclaim memory as that which cannot be affected by Mandela Effect. Another completely circular argument comes into the picture as memory is the thing or as part of the thing in question. If you find you can't remember where you place something, you stop and say, well, my memory isn't affected in any way, so it must be another reason why I can't find it. It is egocentric taking a perfunctory position dismissing memory or any cognition for that matter as primary faults. The thing in question, memory, based off of its function should be the first thing re-evaluated, not pardoned. It is a contradiction to discount memory in the culpability of mismemory, when it is precisely memory one uses to confirm an accurate account. As a measure of veracity, the opposite means failure of function, therefore of measurement. If you produce a special exception for memory regarding Mandela Effect, you create a paradox once again. The means by which one confirms reality is also necessarily the means by which one fails to confirm reality. And since memory is part of reality, one should recognize its duality as part of such. That is, one should recognize both its corroboration and omission of truth. Reality, by how one intuitively defines it, putting aside editorials and opinions on what's real or not, encompasses all. Reality is not a scene change on a stage. One doesn't peer into different parallel realities from the outside. To claim that you come from another reality is a contradiction in terms, because first it presupposes reality as a place. This is a common misguided idea that infiltrates science fiction movies. There is no quote-unquote container that harbors a reality. Reality itself is the container which encompasses all. All constants in change are the reality's composition. It also follows the person or object in question is consequently so, precisely due to what had preceded it. Not in the absolute sense, but that is for a different discussion. Exclusion of such indicates aberration in production of the final nature of that which is in question. To say, I am from another reality, is complete utter nonsense in the literal sense. To claim reality as such that things observed presently are from another reality is conversely as preposterous and contradictory. A real object or person is not separate from what constitutes reality. The neglect of this defining feature arises from omission of antecedent and contingency. To acknowledge a thing necessarily admits its total reality. Such total reality must necessarily be what precedes and succeeds it. It is what exists with which included in what it exists. An object or person is historically greater than perception presumes. Anything other than such is a mere mental injection of what is real. Separating one constituent of reality from another is fiction, since they are intricately intertwined. What is only intact and real when all preceding and succeeding juncture reflect that fact. These senseless ideas of parallel reality as an experience, as objects or people, are mental constructs, since preceding and succeeding incidents are what dictate and construct reality experience every given moment. Because what's imagined does not directly interfere with the fabric of reality, ignorance of implication sustains it. It can subsist even without ignorance of implication, otherwise how else would one who does realize the implication also enjoy the breach in entertainment, such as a movie? That is how I can form the idea, for example, while we sleep, two-headed green aliens secretly float our brains out and into their ships in the sky for examination. This defies a great deal, making it ridiculously implausible, but being a mental creation by ignorance of its implications emerges as a possibility. It doesn't have direct physical violation. Of course, the mental is ultimately physical, and these ways of thinking could eventually take their toll, but we are speaking short-term and perhaps with varying severity. Asserting that any one individual can be of an alternate reality within our own has no meaning, and to make such an assertion produces an amazing paradox. Recognizing the idea of parallel reality produces the paradox by accepting antecedent and contingency. When you acknowledge a parallel reality, you necessarily acknowledge its antecedents. But the fact the past and present moments do not reflect the precedents and contingencies of succeeding events, that reality is instead void. One effectively creates a provisional prop. Just like on a stage, props represent something for a moment. A prop is projection of mental concoction for a fictional purpose. This works for the ignorant because mental constructs relative to the moment do not produce an effect that confirm, deny, or violate reality, so they make no overt disturbance to cognition. If we understand these implications, we then realize the assertion of parallel reality, parallel objects or people, represents a melee. Inherently does so because those implications would result in non-reality, that is, non-existence of that which clearly exists. This also sets up a self-refuting notion that if you accept, for example, this person could be from an alternate reality, then so could we all. Nothing is pardoned from the scope of all and how it defines reality, history, and how reality and its history define it. Does this sound familiar? If one claims to be a god, then the possibility arises that anyone could be a god, since the proclamation is an unproven negative. But the notion, when original novel, becomes a possibility for the ignorant. If all is a parallel reality, nothing of it is deemed parallel reality. Nothing could acknowledge parallel reality, since all, being it and everything else, shifts in total proportion, we would be none the wiser of any changes. Dissonance associated with not recognizing reality in any capacity is based on the internal dismantling of cognition. Either something has always been the same, but bias and mismemory impede that recognition, or something has changed but based on tangible and mundane changes. The transgression and impossibility in the idea of select things or people originating from parallel realities would, in epic proportion, create cognitive dissonance. This applies not only to antecedent and contingency, but also to recognizing a thing, as it would be unrecognizable. This would be due to the implausible divorce of one constituent of reality from reality, which is nonsense. Since one defines all, and all defines one, nothing would be familiar nor sustain itself. Nothing, no one, no idea. There would be no coherence because of gross violation. There necessarily must be one reality, one in which is constant and all-encompassing to circumvent these paradoxes that obviously do not exist. And only mental breaks in the perceiving of reality explain discrepancies. The scientific and logical evidences present against these discrepancies as explanation, while internal breach in cognition explains the strained memory against what is, against reality. Once again, mere introjected mental concoction is seemingly plausible, as it does not violate functioning reality. Reality is intact, while status of perception and mental state confirm or mentally depart from it. One is necessarily part of the reality. If reality, that is, all that which is, encompasses all, then memory too is absolutely part of it, and if it changes, so does memory necessarily, since memory is more or less a cognitive reflection of the past. Unless, of course, that change was a realistic change, e.g., they, people, changed the title of the book and republished it with our lingering memory of what used to be. This demonstrates that simple, mundane changes by the hand of human beings have occurred, and not some kind of supernatural or otherworldly occurrence. Why do the Mandela Effect believers assume such a complex and erroneous idea over the simple fact that companies, artists, and content creators, human beings in general, edit, change, or update things? Or that people make mistakes and a thing has actually never changed? Or that people change their names for whatever political, personal, or social reason, or they actually never change their name at all? Or people misremember, or they spread or are exposed to misinformation? Why is this level of crazy becoming more and more prevalent and accepted? Why isn't the mysterious aspects of the human brain, memory, and perception brought into focus instead? As I demonstrated in my Star Wars video example, editing in movies, actors' embellishments, ad-lib, and impromptu often occur. Forrest Gump, which happens to be another popular Mandela Effect example, actually has two that we know of, distinct scene takes in which the dialogue was also slightly different, not only in wording but inflection and delivery. Is it possible we were originally exposed to this alternate take at first and they re-released the film with the take as it is now? Yes, it's possible. There are other factors as well that we will discuss regarding Gump. If it is not the case the alternate take was ever in circulation, then influence, conflation, editing, and revisions are the major reasons there appears to have been a change. It also happens in television series and sitcoms. I've seen the show Friends, for example, many times, and most of the episodes numerous times. Throughout the years, I've noticed small edits or scenes or lines that weren't originally there, meaning in the original airings. Do I assume a magical thing happened, or that the TV company, production crew, creators, etc. decided to edit in unused clips? Either way, whichever one explanation turns out to be the reason, even if a change was for some occult reason or political statement, it is still human-made and debunks the advent of a supernatural or metaphysical shifting. Reality has its own explanations. Fabricating them is superfluous.